The rain hammered against the church windows like bullets, each drop echoing the sobs that filled the small chapel. Sarah Martinez clutched two crying infants against her chest, their tiny fists grasping at her black funeral dress. Around her, mourners whispered and stared, but their eyes held judgment, not sympathy. These weren't just any babies, they were the twins that had been rejected by their own family, the children whose disabilities had made them burdens in the eyes of those who should have loved them most. But Sarah saw something different. Through her tears, she looked down at 6-month-old Emma and Jake and made a promise that would change not just their lives, but the entire community around them. Little did anyone know that these unwanted children would grow up to become something extraordinary, something that would leave everyone who had once turned their backs absolutely speechless. This is their story. This is a story of how love conquered everything. Sarah Martinez and Maya Rodriguez have been inseparable since 3rd grade. While other kids played with toys, they built dreams together, dreams of traveling the world, of having families, of growing old on rocking chairs, sharing stories about their wild youth. Maya was the adventurous one, always ready to leap before looking, while Sarah was a steady anchor, the one who thought things through and cleaned up the messes afterward. Their friendship survived everything. Maya's rebellious teenage years, Sarah's parents' divorce, college in different states, and early career struggles. When Maya called Sarah at 2 a.m., crying about her on and off relationship with Derek, Sarah listened. When Sarah's engagement fell apart 6 months before her wedding, Maya drove 8 hours to hold her while she cried. So when Maya called Sarah with trembling voice to say, "I'm pregnant with twins," Sarah didn't hesitate. "We'll figure this out together," Sarah said, already mentally rearranging her small apartment to make room for a friend who needed her. But Maya's voice cracked. "Derek, he wants nothing to do with them. And my parents, Sarah, they're furious. They say I've ruined my life, that I'm too young, too unstable. They want me to—" "No," Sarah interrupted firmly. "Whatever they're pressuring you to do, remember that you have choices. And you have me." Maya moved in with Sarah during her 6th month of pregnancy. They painted the spare room yellow and green, bought 2 cribs from a thrift store, and spent evenings reading parenting books. Sarah watched Maya's belly grow with a mixture of excitement and worry, excitement for the life growing inside her best friend, worry about the stress that constantly creased Maya's brow. The twins arrived on a cold February morning, 6 weeks early. Sarah held Maya's hand through 18 hours of labor, whispering encouragements and wiping sweat from her forehead. When Emma arrived first, tiny and fighting for breath, the doctors worked frantically. Jake followed 12 minutes later, equally small but crying lustily. "Are they okay?" Maya gasped, trying to see her babies through the crowd of medical staff. The silence stretched too long. Dr. Peterson finally approached, her expression carefully neutral. "The babies are stable, but we need to run some tests." Emma shows signs of cerebral palsy, likely from oxygen deprivation during delivery. And Jake were seeing indicators of autism spectrum disorder. Sarah felt Maya's hand go limp in hers. In the days that followed, as the twins fought for their lives in the NICU, Sarah watched her best friend slowly withdraw. Maya's parents visited once, took one look at the tiny babies connected to machines, and left without a word. Derek never came at all. "They're still your babies," Sarah whispered to Maya one evening as they sat beside the incubators. "They're still perfect." But Maya's eyes were distant, filled with a pain Sarah couldn't reach. "Everyone was right," Maya said flatly. "I can't do this. I can't be what they need." Sarah's heart broke for her friend, but also burned with fierce protectiveness for the tiny beings fighting for life in front of them. "Then I will be," she said quietly. Maya looked at her with surprise. "Sarah, you don't understand what you're saying. Special needs children, the doctors say Emma might never walk normally, might need constant care. Jake might never speak, might need—" "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupted. "I understand that they're innocent children who deserve love. I understand that they're your children, which makes them precious to me. And I understand that if you can't see past their disabilities to see their potential, then maybe I'm the one who's supposed to raise them." Maya stared at her friend for a long moment. "You would do that? Really? Give up your career, your freedom, your chance at a normal life?" Sarah reached through the incubator opening and gently touched Emma's tiny fist, which immediately wrapped around her finger with surprising strength. Maya, love isn't about convenience. It's not about perfect circumstances or easy choices. These babies didn't ask to be born, and they certainly didn't ask to be born with challenges. But they're here, and they deserve someone who will fight for them. 3 weeks later, Maya signed the adoption papers with shaking hands. Sarah held her as she sobbed, understanding that this was both the hardest and most loving thing her friend could do. "Promise me," Maya whispered. "Promise me you'll tell them I love them enough to give them what I couldn't." "I promise," Sarah said, not knowing it would be the last promise she'd ever make to her best friend. Maya died 2 weeks later in a car accident, driving home from a job interview in the next state. She had been trying to rebuild her life, trying to become someone worthy of her children. Instead, she left behind 2 infants and a best friend whose world had suddenly become much heavier and much more precious. Sarah stood in her apartment, looking at 2 cribs, boxes of formula, and a pile of medical appointments that seemed to reproduce every time she looked away. At 26, she had imagined her life would involve career advancement, dating, maybe a cute apartment with a cat. Instead, she was a single mother to twins with special needs, working as a part-time graphic designer from home while navigating a world of physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and medical bills that made her credit cards weep. Emma's cerebral palsy affected her left side, making her movements uncoordinated and requiring leg braces. But even as a toddler, she had the most expressive eyes Sarah had ever seen, eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her with intense curiosity. Jake, meanwhile, lived in his own world much of the time, rarely making eye contact and preferring to line up his toys in perfect rows rather than play with them conventionally. But when he did focus on something, his concentration was absolute and his memory was phenomenal. The hardest part wasn't the medical needs or even the financial strain, it was the isolation. Other parents at the playground would smile politely but keep their children at a distance when Emma stumbled or when Jake had a meltdown over change in routine. Family gatherings became exercises in deflecting well-meaning but hurtful advice. "Have you considered specialized care?" Sarah's aunt suggested delicately over Thanksgiving dinner when Jake rocked back and forth while humming. "They are getting specialized care," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "At home where they belong." "But honey," her mother added gently, "you're so young. You could still have a normal life. Find someone, have your own children." Sarah looked across the table at Emma, who was carefully eating her mashed potatoes one tiny bite at a time, and Jake, who had arranged his green beans in groups of 3. "I have my own children," she said firmly, "and this is my normal life." But alone at night, after the twins were finally asleep, Sarah sometimes allowed herself moments of doubt. When the electricity was turned off because she'd had to choose between the power bill and Emma's physical therapy, she wondered if Maya's parents had been right. When Jake screamed for 2 hours because she'd accidentally bought the wrong brand of cereal, she questioned whether love was really enough. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Emma was 3. Sarah was trying to work while keeping an eye on both twins, frustration building as deadlines loomed and Jake's humming grew louder. Emma, who had been quietly sitting with paper and crayons, suddenly tugged on Sarah's shirt. "Mama, look," she said, her speech still unclear but determined. Sarah glanced down, expecting to see typical toddler scribbles. Instead, she saw something that made her heart stop. Emma had drawn a remarkably detailed picture of a butterfly, its wings perfectly symmetrical, its body proportioned correctly. The drawing showed an understanding of shape, color, and artistic composition that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old. "Emma," Sarah whispered, kneeling down to her daughter's level, "this is beautiful. How did you—" Emma smiled, her face lighting up with pride. "I see it in my head, then my hand makes it come out." That same week, Sarah discovered Jake could recite the numbers on every license plate he'd ever seen. Not just remember them, recite them in order, by date, by state, by any organizational system he chose. His mind was like a computer, cataloging and organizing information in ways that astounded her. Sarah realized that instead of seeing her children as limited by their disabilities, she needed to start seeing them as gifted in ways she was only beginning to understand. Emma's artistic talent bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight. By age 4, she was creating drawings that left adults speechless. Her cerebral palsy meant she worked slowly, gripping her pencils differently than other children. But what emerged from her careful movements was pure magic. She drew not just what she saw, but what she felt: portraits that captured emotion, landscapes that breathed with life, abstract pieces that seemed to express feelings she couldn't yet put into words. Jake's mathematical mind was equally extraordinary. He could calculate complex equations in his head, recognize patterns in everything from music to architecture, and had an intuitive understanding of numbers that amazed his tutors. But more importantly, he began to communicate more as he grew older, using his logical mind to navigate social situations that had once overwhelmed him. Sarah learned to advocate fiercely for her children. When the local school suggested separate special education classes, she fought for inclusion. When doctors recommended limiting Emma's artistic activities to focus on more practical skills, Sarah found art therapists who understood that Emma's creativity was not a distraction from her development, it was a key to it. She processes the world through art. Dr. Lisa Chun, Emma's art therapist, explained to Sarah, when she draws, she's not just creating pictures. She's making sense of her experiences, building neural pathways, developing fine motor skills. This isn't just talent. It's therapy, communication, and joy all rolled into one. Similarly, Sarah learned that Jake's need for routine and his mathematical thinking weren't obstacles to overcome, but strengths to build upon. When he struggled with transitions, they created visual schedules with mathematical precision. When he had difficulty with social cues, they broke down interactions into logical patterns he could understand and follow. The twins' uniqueness began to attract positive attention. Emma's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was the first educator who truly understood what she was seeing. "Sarah," she said during a parent conference, "I've been teaching for 23 years, and I've never seen artistic ability like Emma's. Yes, she needs extra help with physical tasks, but her creative mind is extraordinary. We need to nurture this gift." Mrs. Rodriguez arranged for Emma to work with a high school art teacher twice a week. At age 6, Emma was learning techniques typically taught to teenagers, her small hands creating works that would have been impressive coming from someone 3 times her age. Jake's mathematical abilities came to light when he corrected his second-grade teacher's math on the board, not to be disrespectful, but because the incorrect equation genuinely distressed him. "The pattern is wrong," he said quietly, standing up without permission. 7 times 8 is 56, not 54. The rhythm is broken. Rather than being annoyed, Mr. Thompson was intrigued. He began giving Jake increasingly complex problems, watching in amazement as the boys solved them quickly and accurately, often using methods that weren't traditionally taught until high school. Word spread through the educational community about the Martinez twins, not as cautionary tales or inspirational stories, but as proof that intelligence and talent come in many forms, and that what society often labels as limitations might actually be different kinds of strengths. Sarah began receiving calls from researchers, therapists, and educators who wanted to work with Emma and Jake. But she was careful, protective. Her children weren't lab rats or inspiration porn. They were simply kids with unique minds and hearts full of dreams. When the twins were 9, Sarah's carefully constructed world nearly collapsed. Her freelance graphic design business had been struggling with increased competition from overseas contractors, and Emma's medical needs had become more expensive as she required specialized equipment and more intensive therapy. Jake, meanwhile, needed educational support that the local school couldn't provide, requiring private tutoring that strained Sarah's budget to the breaking point. The crisis came to a head on a cold October morning when Sarah opened her laptop to find an email that made her blood run cold. Her biggest client, who provided nearly 60% of her income, was terminating their contract effective immediately. "Budget cuts," they explained apologetically. "Nothing personal." Sarah stared at the screen, calculating and recalculating numbers that stubbornly refused to add up. Without that income, she couldn't afford a mortgage on their small house-to-house that had been specially modified for Emma's needs, with ramps and grab bars and wide doorways. She couldn't afford Jake's tutoring. She might not even be able to afford Emma's physical therapy. For the first time since Maya's death, Sarah felt truly defeated. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by bills and bank statements, and allowed herself to cry, really cry, for the first time in years. Emma found her there. At 9, Emma moved slowly but with determination, her leg braces clicking against the hardwood floor. Without a word, she climbed onto Sarah's lap, no easy feat given her physical challenges, and wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck. "Mama's sad," Emma observed, her speech still affected by her condition, but clear enough to break Sarah's heart. "Yes, baby," Sarah admitted, not wanting to lie. "Mama is sad and worried about money." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised Sarah. "My pictures make people happy. Happy people give money sometimes." Sarah pulled back to look at her daughter. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma pointed to the refrigerator, where several of her recent drawings were displayed. "Mrs. Chun says my pictures are special. Maybe special pictures can help with money." It was Jake who understood first. He had been listening from the doorway, and now he approached with the careful deliberation he brought to solving complex problems. Probability suggests that if Emma's art has value to educators and therapists, it might have commercial value as well, he said, his formal speech pattern making him sound much older than his 9 years. "We should consider the economic potential of Emma's artistic output while simultaneously leveraging my mathematical abilities for tutoring services." Sarah stared at her son, amazed as always by his logical mind. "Jake, are you suggesting that you and Emma could work to help with our money problems?" "I'm suggesting we function as a family unit with complementary skills," Jake replied. "Emma creates, I calculate, you coordinate. Together, we might achieve financial stability." That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She created a simple website showcasing Emma's art and advertising Jake's tutoring services for younger children struggling with math. She wasn't sure anyone would respond, but she was desperate enough to try anything. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emma's art touched people in ways Sarah hadn't expected. Parents of other special needs children reached out, saying that Emma's drawings perfectly captured their own children's spirits. Art collectors contacted her, wanting to purchase original pieces. Greeting card companies inquired about licensing Emma's designs. Jake's tutoring filled up within a week. Parents were amazed by his ability to break down complex mathematical concepts into simple, logical steps that their children could understand. His patience was infinite, his explanations clear, and his success rate was remarkable. But the real breakthrough came when Mrs. Chin suggested that Emma participate in a local art exhibition featuring emerging artists. At 9 years old, Emma would be by far the youngest participant, but her work could hold its own against artists decades older. Sarah was nervous about putting Emma in such a public situation, worried about how people might react to her physical disabilities. But Emma was excited, proud of the opportunity to share her art with a wider audience. The night of the exhibition, Sarah dressed Emma in her favorite blue dress and helped her practice walking with her canes in her most confident manner. Jake, in his carefully chosen outfit, tags removed, seems perfectly aligned, insisted on coming to provide moral and logistical support. The gallery was packed with people Sarah had never imagined in her world: sophisticated art collectors, local dignitaries, newspaper reporters. She watched nervously as people approached Emma's section of the exhibition, waiting for the reaction she'd grown accustomed to seeing when people first noticed Emma's braces and unsteady gait. Instead, she watched faces transform with wonder. People weren't seeing a disabled child who made art, they were seeing an artist who happened to be a child. Emma's pieces drew crowds, sparked conversations, and moved people to tears. "Excuse me," a woman in an elegant coat approached Sarah. "Are you Emma's mother?" Sarah nodded, instinctively moving closer to Emma, who was carefully signing prints for people who wanted to support her work. "I'm Rebecca Martinez from the City Arts Council," the woman continued. "I've been watching people's reactions to your daughter's work all evening, and I have to tell you I've been in the art world for 30 years, and I've rarely seen anything quite like this. Emma doesn't just create art, she creates connection. Every person who looks at her work sees something that speaks to them personally." The woman paused, watching Emma concentrate on signing her name with painstaking care. "We'd like to offer Emma a scholarship to our Young Artist program, and we'd like to discuss the possibility of a solo exhibition next year." She's something very special. That night, driving home with both twins asleep in the back seat and a folder full of business cards and opportunities, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future that wasn't tinged with worry. Emma had sold 12 pieces that evening, with the scholarship covering her advanced art classes and Jake's tutoring income steadily growing. They were going to be okay. More than okay, they were going to thrive. By the time Emma and Jake turned 13, their small town had been transformed by their presence. Emma's art studio, the converted garage that Sarah had helped her set up, had become a destination for art lovers from surrounding cities. Her pieces were selling in galleries across 3 states, and the money was finally allowing the family to breathe financially. But more importantly, Emma had found her voice through art in ways that traditional therapy had never achieved. Her physical limitations were still present. She would always walk with canes, would always move more slowly than her peers, but they had become simply part of who she was rather than obstacles to overcome. She painted with confidence that radiated from every brushstroke, created sculptures that defied the limitations of her fine motor skills, and spoke about her work with eloquence that amazed everyone who met her. "Art is how I talk to the world," she explained to a journalist who was writing a feature about young artists with disabilities. "My body doesn't always do what I want it to do, but my imagination is perfect. When I paint, I can show people what perfect looks like inside my mind." Jake's journey had been equally remarkable but different. His mathematical genius had evolved into something more complex, an ability to see patterns and connections that escaped others. He was now attending high school classes part-time while continuing to tutor other students, but his real passion had become using mathematics to solve real-world problems. When the city was struggling with traffic flow problems downtown, 14-year-old Jake submitted a proposal that used statistical analysis and probability theory to optimize traffic light timing. His solution, when implemented, reduced congestion by 30% and saved the city thousands of dollars in fuel costs and lost productivity. Jake doesn't just understand numbers, his high school calculus teacher explained to Sarah. He understands how numbers relate to everything else: human behavior, environmental factors, social dynamics. It's like he sees the mathematical patterns that underlie everything we do. The twins' success had ripple effects throughout their community. Other parents of special needs children began to see possibilities they hadn't imagined before. Schools started reassessing how they identified and nurtured different types of intelligence. Local businesses began actively recruiting employees with disabilities, recognizing that different perspectives could bring unexpected innovations. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences about parenting special needs children, about seeing potential instead of limitations, about the importance of believing in children who might develop at different paces or in different ways than their peers. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she would always begin these speeches. "I just loved them exactly as they were, while helping them become everything they could be. That's what parents do, or what parents should do." But privately, Sarah knew it had been more complicated than that. There had been nights when she cried from exhaustion, days when she'd wondered if she was doing the right thing, moments when she questioned whether her fierce advocacy was helping or hurting her children. The transformation hadn't just been in Emma, and Jake had been in her as well. Learning to parent with courage instead of fear, to see abilities instead of disabilities, to build a life based on love rather than limitation. The real validation came when Emma was 15 and Jake was accepted into a prestigious university program for gifted students at age 14. But they chose to stay local, Emma to continue developing her art career, and Jake to work on mathematical research with professors who understood his unique mind. They had options, now real choices about their futures that no one had expected 15 years earlier. On a warm spring evening, Sarah sat in her backyard, watching Emma paint the sunset, while Jake worked on geometric proofs at the picnic table. At 17 and 16 respectively, the twins had grown into remarkable young adults whose disabilities had become simply part of their unique identities rather than defining limitations. Emma had just been accepted to a prestigious art school with a full scholarship, her portfolio impressing admissions committees who had rarely seen such mature artistic vision in someone so young. Her paintings were now selling for thousands of dollars. Her exhibitions drew crowds from across the region, and her story had inspired countless other families dealing with similar challenges. But what made Sarah proudest wasn't Emma's success. It was her daughter's empathy and wisdom. Emma regularly visited children's hospitals, teaching art to young patients and showing them that challenges could become strengths. Her gentle spirit and fierce determination had touched hundreds of lives. Jake, meanwhile, had been accepted to MIT at age 16, but had chosen to defer for a year to complete a research project on using mathematical modeling to improve accessibility in urban planning. His work was being reviewed by city planners and disability advocates who recognized that his unique perspective, both as a mathematical genius and as someone who had grown up in a world designed for neurotypical people, gave him insights that others had missed. "I want to use mathematics to make the world work better for everyone," Jake had explained to Sarah when she asked about his decision to defer college, especially for people whose minds work differently than expected. As Sarah watched her children no longer the rejected, unwanted babies she had held at Maya's funeral, she thought about the promise she had made that day. She had promised to tell them that their birth mother had loved them enough to give them what she couldn't provide. But now Sarah understood that the story was more complex than that. Maya had given them life, but Sarah had given them the belief that their lives would be extraordinary. Maya had made the impossible choice to let them go, but Sarah had made the impossible choice to help them soar. "Mama," Emma called softly, not looking up from her canvas. "Do you ever wonder what Mom would think of us now?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question that came up periodically in their family conversations. They had pictures of Maya throughout the house, and Sarah had kept her promise to ensure the twins knew about their birth mother's love. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that she would be amazed and proud. But mostly, I think she would be grateful that the choice she made to give you a chance at a different life led to everything you become." Jake looked up from his work, his expression thoughtful. "Statistically speaking, our outcomes were improbable given our initial circumstances. But probability doesn't account for variables like love, determination, and refusal to accept predetermined limitations." Emma smiled at her brother's formal way of expressing emotion. "Jake's right, but I think it's simpler than that. We became who we were supposed to become because we were loved exactly as we were, not in spite of our differences, but including our differences." That night, after the twins had gone to bed, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. She had been asked to write a book about their journey, but had been hesitant to share their stories so publicly. Now, watching Emma and Jake step into their futures with confidence and purpose, she realized that their story wasn't just about them, it was about the potential that exists in every child, especially those who might be written off too quickly by a world that doesn't always understand different kinds of brilliance. She began with a simple sentence. "The twins were born on a cold February morning, and everyone except me thought their story was ending before it had really begun." As she wrote, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that devastating day at Maya's funeral to this moment of limitless possibility, the thread that connected everything was love, not the easy, comfortable love that comes naturally, but the fierce, protective love that chooses to see potential in the face of impossibility. Emma's art now hangs in galleries across the country, her paintings selling to collectors who are drawn to their unique combination of technical skill and emotional depth. But more importantly, her work serves as therapy and inspiration for other children facing similar challenges, showing them that their perspectives have value and beauty. Jake's mathematical mind has caught the attention of researchers and professors who recognize his unique ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. His work on accessibility and urban planning is already being implemented in cities across the region, making life better for thousands of people with disabilities. But beyond their individual achievements, Emma and Jake have become living proof that intelligence, creativity, and human value come in many forms. Their success has changed minds, opened doors, and created opportunities for other children who might otherwise be overlooked or underestimated. Today, as Sarah watches her children prepare for their next chapters, Emma heading to art school, Jake preparing for his advanced mathematics program, she thinks about that rainy funeral day when she held 2 crying babies and made a promise that seemed impossible to keep. She had promised Maya that she would love them enough for both of them. She had promised the twins that they would have every opportunity to become whoever they were meant to be. She had promised herself that she would never let society's limitations become their limitations. Those promises have been kept. But the real miracle wasn't in the keeping, it was in discovering that what everyone else saw as rejection, Emma and Jake had transformed into resilience. What others saw as limitations, they had turned into unique strengths. What society feared was different. They had proven to be extraordinary. The twins who were rejected by their own family became the children who brought an entire community together. The babies who were seen as burdens became the young adults who are now creating solutions to problems others hadn't even recognized. The children who were expected to need constant care became the teenagers who are now caring for others. Emma's art doesn't just decorate walls, it opens hearts and minds, showing people that beauty comes in forms they might not have expected. Jake's mathematics doesn't just solve equations, it solves real problems for real people, making the world more accessible and inclusive for everyone. But perhaps most importantly, their story has become proof that fierce protective love can overcome any obstacle, can transform any limitation, can turn any rejection into the beginning of something beautiful. As Sarah looks back on the journey, she realizes that she didn't save Emma and Jake that day in the funeral home. They saved her. They taught her what it means to love without conditions, to see potential instead of problems, to believe in possibilities that others can't imagine. The woman who once worried about giving up her normal life discovered that there's nothing normal about love this deep, this transformative, this powerful. The woman who wondered if she was strong enough to raise children with special needs learned that strength is about being able to handle everything. It's about being willing to try everything, to advocate for everything, to love through everything. Today, Emma and Jake Martinez are living proof that when society rejects children with disabilities, it's not just failing those children, it's failing itself. Because within every child who learns or moves or thinks differently lies potential that the world desperately needs. Their story continues to unfold, with Emma's art touching lives across the globe and Jake's mathematical mind working to solve problems that will benefit millions. But their greatest achievement isn't their individual success, it's the way they've changed the definition of what's possible. The babies who were once rejected have become the young adults who are now creating a more accepting, inclusive world for the next generation of children who might also be different, who might also be extraordinary, who might also be exactly what the world needs if only someone is willing to see their potential and fight for their dreams. And somewhere, Sarah believes, Maya is watching and smiling, knowing that her impossible choice led to possibilities that no one could have imagined on that cold, rainy day when love first made its promise. Asterisk, the story reminds us that every child deserves someone who believes in their potential, who sees their abilities instead of their limitations, and who loves them fiercely enough to help them reach for dreams that others might say are impossible. Sometimes the children the world rejects are exactly the ones the world needs most. Asterisk,